Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode one of season two of the Booster Riding God King podcast. I'm Chris, aka Dante, and I'm joined with Daniel to start off the episode on abortion.
That was perhaps the weakest opening I've ever heard, and just drool. But yeah, what is this announcer voice that you're affecting?
All right.
Yo,
Fuck
guys,
yeah,
what's
guys!
up?
It's Saturday.
But yeah, no. Episode 1 month after it was intended, I think. Is that right?
I think so. I think we missed 2 weeks, and then there was the one. There was 1 week where Craig wasn't able to record for us, so we couldn't have an episode.
Oh, that's right. Damn.
Well, shit happens. Welcome to the episode. We're going to start off. Today's topic is going to be abortion. And we're just going to kind of talk about, the difference between the pro life stance, the pro choice stance, and everything in between. So, Daniel, give me some cursory thoughts on the issue.
So I think that for me, at least, I didn't really know a lot about it beforehand. Everybody knows, oh, abortion is a thing, right? They know that it's basically becoming not pregnant anymore. And that's really as much as I would expect. If I had to pull any person off the street, that's as far as I would go in terms of like I am confident that any person knows this, right? Above a certain age. That's the first thing.
Yeah. Um,
What do you think is
and
the
I think
baseline for what people know about it?
people just they absorb what they hear in the media and just little tidbits of hearsay here and there, but people don't really look into it at all. I am guilty of this as well. For example, I don't even know what the procedure is when you get an abortion. You know what I mean? I don't know exactly what goes on,
Ah,
right?
right.
Like do they just stick a coat hanger up in there? Like obviously not, but I don't know what the hell the actual procedure is to get the abortion, right? So I don't know what it entails or how it happens. I also don't know what the laws are currently on at what stage of the pregnancy you're allowed to abort and that kind of thing. And I also don't know if like a Plan B pill does that kind of count because you're kind of doing it.
Kind of doing it right. So do you understand pregnancy well? Because I definitely didn't understand pregnancy well. I still don't think I do, but I at least know some of the terms now.
Not really, to be honest. The sperm fertilizes the egg, and then a baby
And
slowly
then what?
forms.
Yeah, exactly. Right. It's there's a lot of shit that goes on, and some of it is just is we don't really think about it. It's like, oh well, that's not gonna happen to me. I'm out of here.
Yeah, correct. Especially because we're both male, it's something that we haven't really like looked into particularly because it's not going to
Not
happen
at
to
all.
us, right? It's not. Yeah, like my
Right.
body is not going to undergo this process, so why do I care, right? Like I'm 5'11", and if I were to look up things about like giant syndrome or stuff like that, it's like I'm not that. I'm not fucking 7 feet tall, so none of that's going to affect me, right? And that's kind of something that people tend to do is people tend to look into the things that are going to affect them directly, and very rarely do they look into things that aren't going to directly affect them to a deep extent. Like, I might know certain details here and there about females, like parts of their menstruation cycle or random things like that I've just picked up along the way of my 23 years of being alive. But
Right.
I'm not super in depth about it. You know what I mean? I don't know how to take care of certain things that are on that side of the fence, on the female side of the fence. So,
So, I guess
so tell me,
to
Daniel,
go
what do you
ahead
what do you
and
know
get
about
into it.
pregnancy?
Very little, very little. I think that I know more than I did before, which is good, always good. But I know enough to know that I don't really know too much about it. Right? Like you said, conception happens. You have mixing of two genetic codes, and then that forms into a child. So from that moment, the egg goes down and attaches itself, or attempts to attach itself to the uterine wall or the uterine lining, in the womb, not just because it doesn't just grow where it's gets conceived. It comes down the tube and then tries to attach itself to the wall of the womb. As far as I'm aware, Plan B interferes here and messes with that process, or subjects it such that it's more likely to just pass through. In fact, a large percentage of not misconceptions. That's not the word I'm looking for. I have it here somewhere. Of technically, you could call it a miscarriage, uh, but usually it's just referred to as a spontaneous abortion or the loss of a fetus before it dies in the 20th week of pregnancy. I'm not sure if you can say that the pregnancy started until it's really attached to the uterine wall or not. So if you take birth control, that's what the process is there to interfere with, right? It's to interfere with. Uh, I think. Oh my god! I hope, because I feel like I'm making an ass out of myself anytime I say something that could be wrong. But I believe that it interferes with that process of the not zygote, the embryo or zygote. Again, the terms are all over the place. But the thing that has the sperm and the egg combined, attaching to the wall, and I would probably consider that the start of the pregnancy.
And you're saying Plan B interferes with that?
Right. So Plan B, I think, is after you can mess with the chemical. Well, no, birth control would mess with that process initially. So I think that Plan B probably does something afterwards to disrupt that attachment before it becomes a larger thing.
Okay. So, out of curiosity, at what point? Let's assume the mantle of a pro-choice person, because I'm not going to assume what your stance is. But if you assume the mantle of a pro-choice person, at what point in the pregnancy stage do you think an abortion is, I don't know, morally acceptable? Let's say.
How pro-choice am I? I guess why am I pro-choice? Because I think that there are many reasons to be pro-choice, and not all of them would feel the same way about this.
Okay, so let's say you're pro-choice because you think that people should have reign over their bodies and be able to make choices related to their bodies and like deal with the consequences that may come of that.
Okay, so if that's the case, I think there's still like a range of where I'd be okay with it. But more or less, if it's very early on, there's nothing wrong about it, right? If you're later in the process, I guess it really does depend on how much you value the how much you recognize, not only how much you recognize the fetus to be a potential human or to be a human, but also a person, right? But also if you believe that your right to live your life as you choose, or your right to liberty, supersedes the right of the fetus in some way. So early on, I think the arguments are very easy, where it's it's so far from being a person or from being a human that not too much consideration needs to go into it, especially if you don't believe the fetus to be a human or to be a person. To be a person, it's very obviously of human genetics, right? Of the species human, but it's not quite a person yet. It hasn't made it to that stage.
Correct. So, for example, if let's say pregnancy had 100% death rate, all right, for some reason, then
For the mother,
yes, the mother dies 100% of the time.
okay,
If like for the child to live, the mother has to die, right? You're making a direct choice between a human who's already alive and thriving and something that hasn't even developed, like maybe it doesn't have a heartbeat or a brain or like any parts of the human body quite yet, you know, would you make that choice? Like, or even let's remove it from that. Let's say you have to choose between a fetus or just a random person. You have a button, you push it, the fetus will cease and the it'll be a miscarriage, or somebody random on the planet will die, right? What do you do?
Well, yeah, it's interesting. So I think that there are problems with the experiment, but what I would personally do, or what I think, it's hard. I need to define the stance of who I am, right?
Of course.
Because
So the
I
thing
think
is
that
that, okay,
there are some pro-choicers that
this
have.
this gets into
Go on.
another issue about where we could go into animal rights as well. Like, because we're human, do we just have superior rights to animals, right? And the
Yeah.
way that we
So
structure society, the way we structure society is that we do, right?
if I could start with a premise that human life is intrinsically valuable, because I don't want to. Rather, I don't think I'm capable of arguing that from a non-human perspective at all. So, I'd like to start with that premise one in this discussion, right?
Sure. Let's start with that, and later I want to delve into going off a different premise. But for now, let's start with that. Human life is valuable. All right,
Okay.
we've got that as square one.
Human life has value, right? You wouldn't kill
Yeah,
a person. It
correct.
is something that we can declare to be morally wrong in pretty much like most cases to all cases, right?
Yes, obviously, besides like self defense or things like that, but yeah,
That's when it gets trickier, but you have to have justification for like life over other life. But let's say human life has value, right?
correct. I agree with that.
So I think that the question of abortion, and I wrote out a question here that I think puts a good part of it across. No, those are experiments. Where is questions? Okay. Right. Okay. So I believe that most perspectives will differ that on whether or not the fetus has the rights that a person has, right? Does a fetus have a
I
right
agree
to
with you.
life in the
I
same way
think
that a person does?
that that is exactly what differentiates the different stances on abortion.
I think there is a bit more nuance based on what I've read, or I would think that there would be in that.
No, there are, but I think that's the underlying issue. The main overarching issue with
Right.
pro-life versus pro-choice is the pro-choice people dismiss the fetus as not having the same rights as a human being, and that the mother's rights are more the mother's rights and life is more important than the fetus's potential life. Let's say.
If the yeah, so one, you can be pro-choice and still believe the fetus has a right to life, just not to supersede your own right to liberty,
Exactly.
which is a more nuanced viewpoint. Or you can just believe that the fetus has no right to life at all.
Yeah, you could.
Uh, or that it develops the right to life gradually over time.
As it progresses through the stages.
Correct.
Yeah, that's why some people are pro-choice, but they wouldn't do an 8-month abortion because at that point it's a baby and it has rights or whatever, so they don't want to do that kind of
Or they,
thing.
they think
Abort
that
at
it
that
has
period of
rights.
time.
Yeah.
Yeah, precisely.
So, and I don't know where to go. I think I have so much that I'm not sure how I should present it if it's in a discussion instead of a discourse. No.
Let's
Discussion
start
is
with
good.
let's start with I got you. Let's start with why don't you give me some thought experiments that you maybe came up with
Oh
when you were
yes,
doing your
I have
research.
written them down. All right.
That's what I'm saying. So
Tell
just
me
hit
how.
me with
Yeah.
them, and I'll walk my way through them. You get me? Lead
So
me. You're the sheep
these will
herder,
these
and
will
I'm the sheep.
be these will be fairly quick at first. Just tell me what your initial gut reaction to one of them is.
Sure.
All abortion is illegal and punitively punished.
I don't agree with that.
Okay, all abortion is legal for any reason.
For any reason,
Any reason at all.
I don't agree with that.
Okay. So, right off, okay, there's a nuanced viewpoint here, and we're trying to figure out why, right? Something's going on there. Let's say that all abortion is legal, but the mother doesn't get to choose to have the abortion. Like it has to be left up to, say, the doctor or the
Or the
father.
government or the father
The
or some
government,
other,
right?
yeah,
Just
some other
not the
entity.
mother. Yeah.
And all abortion is legal?
Yes, and for any reason.
I'm still not okay with it because the mother doesn't have a choice.
Right. Okay. So mothers have some right over their body, right? Women have bodily
Correct.
control and a life. Their rights to live the life as they choose don't stop just because they become pregnant.
Yes.
All abortion is legal, but it's put to a vote of at least 3 medical professionals. So mothers still get the choice, but that choice is vetted by 3 professionals.
I could maybe agree to that.
There's things that depend there. Okay. Uh, all abortion is legal, and women have the right to choose as long as you're married and the child is genetically proven to be both of yours.
So the women get the choice. The women get the choice.
Yes, women get the choice.
But only if they're married. As long as they're married
in the marriage. Yeah. And it was between the 2 spouses.
I mean, I agree with that instance. Like, I think if you're married,
like that's fine.
I think if you're married and you're going to get an abortion, I do think that they should genetically test that it's both of yours, right? And that, however, I do think that there should be abortions outside of the bounds of marriage. In fact,
as well as that.
I think it's more prevalent. Like, I think I care more about the rights of people having an abortion outside of marriage, because if you're in a marriage, like, at least you have that relationship and that foundation to raise the kid on, and between the two of you, you can probably make it work financially or whatever to raise a kid.
Yeah.
I feel like it's out of wedlock that it's more of a problem of raising a kid.
The harm that happens to the family is important.
And the individual, yeah. And the actual baby.
Right. Okay. All abortion is legal as long as you planned on becoming pregnant. Meaning
What?
that ahead of time.
No. I understood.
Yeah. Okay.
Abortion is legal if you planned on becoming pregnant?
Yes, as long as you planned on becoming pregnant.
No. Definitely no.
Why would abortion not be legal in that case? Why should it not be?
Because that would be like, okay, you're planning to become pregnant just to kill it off.
Well, let's say that you planned on becoming pregnant, but you didn't plan on the abortion. However, abortion is made legal because you planned on it. There's something
that's still weird. That's a very iffy. Yeah, there's something iffy there. I don't know about that stance. Because if you because here's the thing. Yeah, if you planned on becoming pregnant, I think you should carry it out. You should live by that consequence. If you planned on it, like if you were like, I'm gonna have a kid, and you get pregnant, at that point, like, you know, if you didn't weigh the pros and cons, if you didn't weigh the pros and cons beforehand of getting pregnant when you were making that decision, like, getting pregnant shouldn't be something you just do casually on a Saturday afternoon because you're horny or something. You know what I mean? It should be something that you think through.
Okay, in that case, abortion is legal as long as you didn't plan on becoming pregnant. Meaning that if you planned on becoming pregnant, now you have to stick it through.
I could agree to that more so than most of the other cases you've presented.
It's not like it's not compulsory abortion, right? We're not demanding that pregnant women go get abortions based on how they got pregnant.
But no.
Option, yeah. So, okay, so in that case, what we're saying is that abortion is illegal if you ahead of time planned on becoming pregnant and had like a government form for it. Those people would not be able to abort their child.
Yes, like let's say you had a form.
No matter the circumstance.
That's where it gets iffy too, as well, right? Because what if you plan on getting Because what if you plan on getting pregnant? You get pregnant with this person, and then your significant other dies. So now you're gonna have to raise the kid on your own, and you're not ready for that. And maybe you weren't the breadwinner of the household, so now you don't even financially know what the fuck to do at this point.
Financial concern. Okay.
Correct.
So we have some reservations about that, meaning that the conditions of the pregnancy should probably be the same, right? Or maybe perhaps even the intention that you wanted to be pregnant needs to be, I still want to be and have this child.
Correct, but actually jumping off of what you were saying earlier, when I said that you should weigh the pros and cons of becoming pregnant and that getting pregnant isn't something you should just do on a Saturday afternoon because you're horny kind of thing. Going off of that, I actually understand the pro-life people because in their eyes, having sex is something you shouldn't just do on a Saturday afternoon because you're horny, right? Like,
Mhm.
sex is more sacred, and sex is between, like, you do it when you're married to someone or when you're in a long-lasting relationship with someone,
Mhm.
and you don't like sexually give yourself away so quickly, right? And so I completely
Right.
understand that, if you're having unprotected sex, you should weigh the pros and cons of that, right?
Yeah.
And if you don't have birth control or you're not using a condom, then you should have weighed the pros and cons, and then you should be forced to stick it through because you didn't weigh the pros and cons, and you now have to live with the consequences of your actions. Just like
So
if you get
the
drunk and drive
consequences of your
behind a
actions
car,
being
right?
that you're pregnant.
Correct. So like if you get drunk and drive a car and crash, it's not like you can be like, oh, but I was drunk, right? You're still gonna have to live with the
Mhm.
consequences.
So the consequences of becoming pregnant are that now there's a fetus in you, or potentially that you made somebody pregnant and there's a fetus there. So I think
Correct.
this is where some positions will differ. One will say, well, okay, I have it there, but it doesn't matter because I can just simply abort it. While the others would say, you can't just abort it like that, right? Just because you want to.
Yes, which
So,
I mean, if we're gonna go by the definition of can't, well, they can. You know what I mean?
right, it's possible, I guess, but they would argue that it
Correct.
should be illegal because it is immoral and potentially murder. While the
Correct.
others simply don't see it though. A fetus is a clump of cells, not a person. So that touches on the next one, where if you intend to have an abortion, but you don't intend to get pregnant, right? Or it's like signing up to be what, an organ donor, right? You're like, okay, well, I will abort my children, then you can get an abortion because it
Okay,
shows
like
some
you
preference for,
register, whatever. You turn
or
16,
you
you
have to opt
register,
out.
whatever.
You have to opt out. Like by default,
By
everyone
default,
can
you're
get an
registered.
abortion.
Okay, but you have to opt out to not be able to have an abortion. I can agree with
But
that
then in that case,
because
right? Why would
no,
you
because
want
then
to?
you're making the choice to opt out.
Yeah, which feels better than compulsory opt-in or needing to opt in. Let's see. Let's see. Okay, on the topic of spousal consent, right?
Okay,
This was a law that tried to be passed back during Planned Parenthood versus Casey. There was a state law in Pennsylvania. Okay, a state law. Let's not say Pennsylvania because I might be wrong. But a state restriction on abortion, saying that a woman needed to sign saying that she had informed the spouse that she would be pursuing an abortion. Not that she needed consent from the spouse, but she needed to notify the spouse or potentially the father of the child.
okay.
It should that be legal? Yes or no? Should it be mandatory for a woman to sign that?
To inform the spouse of the abortion.
Yes.
Well, in a way, I feel like yes, even though the effort required, like a dude just has to come and then boom, baby, right? And they don't have to carry it for 9 months, and there isn't that whole fucking thing. It's still part of their genetics. It's still their baby. So I feel like there should be some sort of discussion before getting an abortion.
Yeah, that was ruled illegal in Planned Parenthood versus Casey and struck from the record. Or not struck from the record, but struck from legislation by the Supreme Court as part of an undue burden. Because, and I think you said something to this effect earlier, that not a large percentage of the population would be affected by this, right? They could just go notify their spouse and then go tell the medical practitioners that they did. But there's a small percentage that if they told them, they would suffer because of it. They would potentially get in a fight or into an outbreak, or it would damage the relationship, etc. Right?
Correct. Yes.
And now imagine if that isn't just notifying the father, but getting consent from the father for the abortion, right?
Yes. Then you open up a whole nother can of worms. Because
So the
if you have to get
situation,
consent from the father, right? If you have to get consent from the father, then a woman who does not want a baby might be forced to have a baby just because she can't get consent from the father for an abortion.
correct. So with notification, the court also deemed it unconstitutional because of the
The
potential
potential implications, yes, of the
yes,
notification.
that even though there's a small percentage of people who would be drastically negatively affected, it caused too much harm to that percentage. It's not about the small portion; it's about the fact that there is a portion, and to focus on that situation. So in these cases, right, I had a lot lined up where let's say that you have to notify your spouse, but the two haven't had sex in over a year, right? This is one of those situations where clearly that's a can of worms.
Yes.
It's not good. Or the moral situations where a woman's pregnant needs spousal consent or notification, and the three situations of she knows it's not his, he knows it's not his, and they both know it's not his, right?
Yeah.
Those are not nice to look at situations. Okay, a woman wants to abort her pregnancy or abort the child because she cannot financially support it.
I mean, I'd agree with that.
Okay, does she need to prove that she cannot financially support it?
Sure. Yeah, because if we're going to go off a system where you abort if you can't financially support it, but then you actually can financially support it, then you're just aborting it to abort it, and that's a whole different section,
Okay, well,
right?
in that case, can a woman abort it because she simply doesn't desire to have a child, but she's capable of supporting it?
I personally am of the opinion, yes,
That she could get an abortion.
she could get an abortion.
Okay. How strong does the reason have to be to not? Is it just I do not want a child? Is that fine?
That's a strong enough fucking reason.
Okay. She has a trip to Paris coming up in 2 weeks, and she doesn't want to put that off. Can she abort the child? Should she abort the child?
I think she shouldn't. Are you kidding me? You're going to abort a kid just because you don't want to delay a trip to Paris? So you're going to abort it and then what? Get pregnant when you come back from Paris, or get pregnant in Paris
Yeah,
with
why
your
not?
lover, and then whatever? Yeah, it's a fair question.
So
That is a
now
can of
we
worms
have an
in and of
issue.
itself. Now we've got a big
A
issue.
woman, a pregnant woman, like we said, if she says that she simply doesn't want a child, there's some connotation here, right? It's I don't want a child because it would interfere with my life and my happiness and all this other stuff. But what if she's just like, no, right? That's a sufficient reason for most people. Well, not most people, but most people who hold the viewpoint that
Yeah,
or believe
pro-choice
themselves to be
people. Yeah,
pro-choice, right? Like some
100%,
reason is
100%.
reason enough. Okay. So, but the trip to Paris being delayed is not reason enough. Why is that?
It should be technically, by what I was saying
Right.
earlier, because she doesn't desire the child. Even if she doesn't desire the child just because it interferes with her Paris plans, she doesn't desire the child. Therefore, she should be allowed to abort.
Hmm.
But I
Do
do
you
take
feel?
issue with it. I feel kind of weird about that one.
I see. I see. Why do you think you take issue with it?
I take issue with it because that's something that, like a 2 week trip to Paris or something, and you don't want to delay the trip. It seems really selfish.
Mm. Selfish in well, I could say the pregnant woman doesn't want to ruin her career because she knows that maternity leave will put her back, and then she'll have to take care of it, and she won't have as much time to dedicate to it. Say she works 10 to 12 hours a day.
Yeah, in which case it's still somewhat selfish for her to decide to stick with her career, right? But I have less of an issue with that one because, you know, if she has a kid, what the fuck is she gonna do? You know,
So is it about the kid or about her?
it's about her.
Okay. So maybe not career, maybe not just a trip. But there's something about the two reasons where one seems to be much more important than the other.
Yeah, sure. Like there are reasonings that can be strong or weak, and the stronger the reasoning, right? Like if you tell me, "Oh, I'm not going to get an abortion because there's a 75% chance I'm going to die." The doctor told me there's a 75% chance I'm going to die. I'm going to lose my career. I don't have the finances to support it. I'm going to be a single parent, and you just list off all these fucking reasons. Your abortion feels very justified. Let's say.
Sure, you have good reasons.
Correct. And I do think there's such a thing as good reasons and bad reasons, but at the end of the day, reasons are still reasons. If it's a good reason to you, then might make sense to get the abortion.
Mm-hmm.
And I think one of the things that's an issue in our world is that we don't have we have a system of laws, but the laws don't correlate necessarily with morality, right? And we don't have a
Right, right. I agree
third
with that.
party. Like if God were to like literally strike people with lightning or something when they did something morally wrong, and the first like three times it doesn't kill you, but the fourth time you're gonna die or something. I don't know, right?
So
We would
yeah,
very quickly adapt to a system where people wouldn't be doing morally incorrect things because someone would get an abortion and then immediately be struck by lightning, and we would know, okay,
if it were
abortions are
immoral,
wrong if it were immoral.
yeah,
Correct,
if
correct.
you had a good fucking litmus test or a stick that said, oh well, that one's moral and that one's not.
Yeah, exactly. And we
So
don't
in the
have
case
that.
where, right, in the case where we're not sure what's moral, so here's a great one. You can get an abortion for any reason on request is, I believe, the legal phrase that is used. You can get an abortion on request, right? So let's say somebody seeks an abortion on request because the sex of their child is female.
Okay.
Is it legal? Should it be legal?
I mean, I don't know how to comment on the legality of that. I think it's kind of fucked up because they don't. Let's say they're
It's
saying they
messed
don't
up.
want a female child, right? Specifically, but
Right.
if it were male, that they wouldn't abort it. I feel like there's some
That's
sort of
correct.
issue there. There's some kind of problem there. But at the same time, if they want to abort it, they want to abort it. It's their choice.
Mhm. So there are 9 states in the U.S. that ban the abortion based on the reason of sex selection or sex selective abortions. There are 2 states that ban
Okay, hold up.
abortions.
My issue with that is people can just lie. You know what I mean? So it's not a
Oh yeah,
particularly
of course. People can
strong.
get around it.
Yeah, people can get around it pretty
Yeah,
easily.
it's not a strong legislation to stop something that's wrong. That's what you're saying, and I agree with that. It's not strong, but to know what somebody's thinking isn't possible right now. 2 states prohibit abortions for reasons of race of the child, and 2 states prohibit abortions when the fetus may have a genetic anomaly. And these are all very different reasons, right? But for some reason, the law has come out and said, okay, these are so wrong of a reason that we're going to make them illegal, and they haven't been overturned yet. And most people would agree that it's wrong to abort a fetus based on its sex. And some people would agree that it's wrong to abort a fetus because you have a trip to Paris in 2 weeks. And some, maybe fewer people, or maybe some, I'll use some again, would agree that it's wrong to abort a child to progress your career, right?
Correct.
And for the ones that are more hazy, are the ones where most people say, okay, well, that's not right. We don't have laws for it. Or the ones where some people are in agreement and some aren't. But why is it that for sex selective abortion, everybody can kind of come together on this one and say, okay, no? Why is that one so specifically morally wrong, do you think?
Ooh, okay. I think it has to do with the same reason people have problems with, like, people can come together on the fact that sexism and racism are morally wrong, right? People can generally come together about that.
It's bad to discriminate against, uh, let's say, persons based on X or Y.
On their race or their religion or
Mhm.
their sexual preference or their gender, let's say, right? And then, in my opinion, on their preferences in general, like what they like to do or don't like to do, like if you want to be a furry, and I'm not going to judge you for it. But
Mm-hmm.
there are certain ones that people can agree on very strongly and others that they can't. Like there are some people who are very homophobic, let's say, and they feel justified in their homophobia, right? And other people who are like, no, that's just fucked up and wrong. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
And I think that in that case, because we can so easily agree on, let's just say sexism and racism, since we can so easily agree on sexism and racism being morally wrong as a whole, like it's pretty difficult to find. I mean, not difficult. I'm sure you can find people, but it's the minority of people that would say that sexism and racism are morally
Or
correct. Let's say.
or maybe just not wrong, right?
Yeah, sure, sure. And because of that, right, when you're making the choice of the life of your baby or the development of your fetus into a baby based on its gender, you're being sexist.
Does it have to be a person for you to be sexist against it?
That's a good question. Maybe not. Maybe if you're gonna go buy a dog and then the dog's male instead of female, you're like, no, fuck this dog, and then you don't buy it because it's male and you wanted a female dog. Then I don't know. I don't think that's particularly correct either. If you liked the dog and it was cute and it was what you wanted. I mean, obviously, there's
Right.
let's say situations where that doesn't work out. Like if you want to breed the dog and you already have a female dog, you need a
Let,
male
let's
dog, right?
let's keep it to human though, because we're on the premise that human life has intrinsic value and some type of there's because of its intrinsic value some type of respect that it deserves, right?
Correct.
And I think that is probably where most of my current opinion comes from. That for instance, when thousands or more of children or potential children or fetuses, whatever we're going to call them, are aborted in China because they're not men, or in India because they're not men, or they wouldn't be men, or are female in sex. People get together and they're like, okay, well that is clearly wrong because you're putting the what of a female under the one of a male. Is it the life? Because in that case, we're recognizing that the fetus is in some ways,
Alive, yeah.
potential to personhood or humanhood, which I think people don't really disagree that there's at least potential, if not wholly, it is a person, right? So we can look at that and say, well, essentially, what you're doing is valuing the human life of a male over a female, and we
Correct.
know
If
that to
but
be wrong.
correct. But that's if you're equating the let's say we do assign the fetus to having life. That means you're also equating the life of a fetus to the life of a human.
Yeah, and then this is where I think that pro-life arguments have a lot of validity, right? Because they'll see, or even that the fact that they can criticize pro-choicers sometimes and saying, well, then sex selective abortion obviously shouldn't be illegal based on your point of view, and it's because they have this reduction where there's this lack of nuance on both sides. One is like, well, obviously you're just in it because you think that they're a person, when that's ridiculous. And some pro-lifers will say, well, I can't help but think of them as a person because there are many things I wouldn't do to a fetus that I wouldn't do to a person in the same way. I wouldn't kill it based on its sex. I wouldn't kill it based on if I was poor or if it was poor. I wouldn't kill it if it was an orphan. I wouldn't kill it if XYZ, right? I wouldn't kill a person just because they're 5 years old and their parents beat them. I wouldn't kill it if they were extremely poor or of a certain race or anything like that. And I extend those things to fetuses, and I think the most logical way for me to do so is that I respect the potential of personhood in them, and I think them to be people as a result. And on the other side, it's this, well, they're not people yet. But I'll agree with you that we probably shouldn't abort them based on sex. And there's this middle ground where I currently lie, where I think that it probably is very difficult to even declare whether it is or isn't. And I think that's where I'm at. It is sometimes, it isn't others, and the reason why I think stay on. Oh my god. Anyways, we got sniped. Oh my god, one
Yeah,
server
we
in
literally
my
just got
entire
sniped
Discord
off our
list.
server.
My one server, this server in the Discord list goes down, and everything else is fine, but this one's unavailable. They fixed it pretty quick though. That's nice. Maybe they
Yeah,
just had
bro.
a connection
I'm
issue.
hoping Craig recorded the beginning of the podcast.
Oh no, he probably does. He probably does. Oh
All right,
god.
cool.
Wait, does Craig send out links for you to look at, or
Yes,
okay, who gets those links?
I'm looking. I got it once. I don't remember how. I think he messages it to me directly. Can you hear me
Damn.
still?
I can hear you.
You can hear me right now?
Yes, I can.
Today at 3:49 p.m. Recording whatever. Okay, here we go. Here we go. Today at 3:03
Do you
p.m.
have it?
Recording. Yeah, the download link. Yeah, I've got it. I've got it.
Okay. Then, so from what I was saying last time is, let me think. Where did I end before we got cut off? Yeah. The core of it is that one side airs on this is a person, and the other one airs on this is not. Because to take the middle ground is not reasonable in some manner, right? It is. Well, I think it depends on what you mean. What I mean by reasonable. I think taking the middle ground feels like you haven't made a decision very easily.
Correct. I
Like,
could
oh,
see
well, it's not
that.
a person or it is a person. Or it depends. And usually that's not a satisfactory reason because people don't reach it on their own. They don't reach that conclusion by some thought or chain of thoughts, right? They reach it by, well, one side is saying this and the other side is saying that. So, who knows?
Yeah, exactly,
Instead of making a
exactly.
decision. And I feel like I've made a fairly nice one. So I think that the pro life has a respect for human life, but the religious parts of it have a mandate to respect human life. Right? It's a sin. Their stick says it is immoral. They have gotten some divine word that tells them that it is immoral to do so. So
Sure.
if they genuinely believe that, right, then it's very hard to argue. Pro-lifers who are not religious, who say I would err on the side of human life to the extent that I would never feel comfortable providing a reason to induce the abortion of to have an induced abortion because they don't know where they would draw the line. At some point they feel that for any reason besides the or I mean some cases people will say for any reason including the life of the mother being at risk you cannot abort the child, say the day before it's delivered, right?
Correct.
But
Yes,
they
some
don't know
people
where to
hold that
draw the
opinion.
line. They don't know where to draw the line because you have premature births that succeed. And I have a statistic for that.
I mean, I was premature. I was 3 months premature.
Yeah, 3 months premature.
So if
And
someone if someone had a 7 month abortion, or sorry, someone had a 5 month, like 5 month or less abortion, then I would have never been born.
yeah, it's difficult because let's see. I have a at 25 weeks in the pregnancy, viability reaches 50% or more. But do you play a numbers game with a potential human life? And I think that is a good question because you'll get many responses to it. I think you'll get the well, it's not a numbers game, or well, it's not a human life, or how dare you ask me that, or right. There's a ton of different ways that people can respond to this question that informs you a little bit of how they think about it.
Correct.
Is it morally acceptable or permissible to play a numbers game where I may abort it because it's over under 50% viability, or I won't because it's over 50%? Or is the potential of a human life so intrinsically valuable that you cannot terminate it? That you should show an immense respect towards it, which I think are two different things. There are staunch pro-lifers who just say you can't. It's immoral and it's wrong because you can't just say, well, because the child was unlikely to live, that makes it more permissible. Or
Of
I don't
course.
understand how you can't call it a child because it clearly will be, right? That is the organism that will become a person.
I mean, here we go. Going off of that, if we were to do that, right? Oh, the child's unlikely to live, so I'm going to abort it. Then, oh, we shouldn't be working on a cure for cancer. When people get cancer, we should just take them out back with the shotgun and kill them.
Right. So
Which
now
people obviously disagree with, right? Because we
we
have
come
all
back to
these
the
cancer
distinction
fights.
of, is it a person or not? Is a fetus's life valuable or not? And the distinction is one, where did you get your reasoning from? Or I guess the distinctions are yes or no, or maybe it depends. So on the side of yes, you can get your reasons from religion is one. You can find a belief based on something that was told to you, and you have that is your reason to believe it, right? Which is, let's say, they're part of the discussion, so we have to accept it at least in some form as an opinion that people hold. Or it could be, I can't find a reasonable point to stop considering it a person because I wouldn't kill it 9 months in, or I wouldn't have an abortion 9 months in. I wouldn't have an abortion 8 months in. I wouldn't have an abortion 7 months in. So how can I find a place that I call it reasonable to stop, right? Or what would I consider reasonable to say, well, that is not a person. And really, it has the potential to become something that has the potential to become a person. But it's okay to take actions against it. In the depends camp, you have, well, yes, that's the very thing. It does depend. There's a
Oh,
moral
of
weight to it
course.
that increases as the baby gets closer to delivery, or as the pregnancy goes further along in its trimesters or its weekly gestation period.
Correct, but then you have an issue there, right? Because, for
Where's the
example,
line?
I'd rather be upper upper poor class than lower middle class because of the tax things. Like I'd rather be at the very very top of what is still considered poor than at the very very bottom of what's considered middle class because then I'm in a different tax
Hmm.
bracket. Even though I'm only making a differential of like maybe $10 a month, or whatever the fuck
You
this
still want to be
barrier
there.
is, right? I'd rather be at the top. Like I'm not making this amount of money I'm making. I'm making more money being poor, quote unquote, than being middle class because of the taxes. If I'm on the upper bracket versus the lower bracket, because there's an actual dollar amount where
What
it
is the
changes,
purpose
right?
of this? What are you saying
Oh,
here?
that basically when it comes to kids, it's like if you're allowed to Adam push to talk. It's like if you're gonna abort a kid, let's say you make it 3 months, right? That means you can abort a kid if it's before 3 months, but you can't abort it if it's 3 months in one day, right?
I see.
It's
I
too
see what you're
difficult
saying.
to
Yeah.
create a barrier, to
So
create a
why is the line
distinction,
so
right?
blurry? Right. Exactly.
Especially when you have someone like me where I was in the womb 6 months only, right? And I came out and
Mm.
here I am. And so it's not distinction. Yes, I'm 3 months
You
premature.
were born you were born under 50% odds.
Yep.
Yeah. So then you have the pro-choice side, which says, okay, well, in the beginning, you can't ever call it a person, so we can't afford it personal rights at that point. It would just be so detrimental to the rights of the people who have to carry it. But you'll notice if you take the pro-choice stance to 9 months, you it's very hard to agree with for some people. And if you take the pro-life stance to 0 months,
It's very hard
that
to
is
agree
also
with.
hard. But the people in the middle have their reasons attacked because there is no clear line, right? There is no, well, I err towards one of these two things because I think it's more important. You have the discussion of, well, regardless of if the fetus has a right to life or not as a person, does the mother's right to life, liberty, and happiness, and the pursuit of happiness supersede that, right? In the case where you have two people infringing on each other's rights, it's very hard to deal with. It's very hard to say, well, who has the better right? or can they both pursue their rights, but in this case, women have it unequally just because they've been alive longer than the fetus has, and they have more power over it. But it's not to say that it's a bad thing. It's that that's simply the case. So people in the middle are so blurry, where their lines are so indistinguishable just from being arbitrary, that it's hard to find yourself to agree with exactly what one person says, because they'll agree, well, you can't really draw a line, so why not have it be a scale? And that will be, I think, the main mindset that people in the middle meet on. But from the two other sides, you'll hear, well, you don't care about women's rights, or you don't believe that the woman's right to a life or to their liberty and to their life and to their body supersede that of somebody who's not even a person yet. And on the other side, you'll have, well, I can't believe you would afford women the right to kill a person, or that their right would supersede that of somebody who has the potential to be a human. And moreover, with the thought experiments about the Paris trip, I think what that shows is, if I was going to use a religious term, irreverence towards the sanctity of human life. If I was not going to use religious terms, it is a lack of respect towards the intrinsic value of a human life. And nobody sits right with that.
No, and
Well,
I
some
think
people
that's part of the dilemma when it comes to this whole abortion thing.
Yeah, fundamentally, are they a person? And if they are a person, does it matter? When does it happen? The initial, okay, that's, now I have like history and facts from Roe v. Wade and all this other stuff in here. There's one last thought experiment that I do want to do real quick.
Let's go for it.
Or maybe not one last. I think there's another one. Oh,
I'm ready for it.
so this lines up with, is it okay? Oh, well, actually, this is the, is the fetus a person, or like to what regard, right? How important is the potential of human life versus the harm that you inflict on it? Also, oh man, I don't like this one. Okay,
Let's go. I'm ready.
so the thought experiment that goes, a woman wants to abort because she cannot financially support the child. Correct? We had that one.
Sure. Yeah, we had that one.
A woman is financially able to support one child, but has a multiple pregnancy, and she is safely guaranteed the ability to abort up all except one child.
Okay.
She is not financially able to support two, and she's pregnant with, let's say, three.
But she can abort two and keep one.
Safely, yes.
Yeah, that's a rough one, because like the psychological damage that might cause to her, because let's say she does that and she has the one child, and then she loves the one child, and then she's constantly haunted by visions of what would have happened if I had two more kids. I could have given this little girl or this little boy brothers and sisters. Like, how would my life have been different? And I love my kids so much. And you mean I could have had three of these motherfuckers? Like there's a whole host of psychological problems that would occur from doing that, because she would constantly feel like she made a decision that was brutal.
Like, valued one life over another.
Correct, which is why, like, it's kind of the whole, if you've seen The Dark Knight, like the whole thing where you have, let's say, like, you had your mother and your father at gunpoint. You had to choose one, right? It's like those are decisions people just don't want to make, or don't even want to think about making, because that means you have to value one life over another. And I know somebody, I actually know somebody who is a sociopath, who actually ranks everybody in his life with a number on how valuable they are to him. Like if he, like a hard standard. So if he ever ends up in a decision where he has to decide between two people, he just refers to the number and makes the decision instantly.
Yeah.
But most people can't work that way, because you can't quantify your emotions or quantify your bonds with people. You know, how close you are with some of your friends, or how close you are with your family. There are certain decisions that it's too difficult to make that, you know?
So I think the thought experiment touches on, actually highlights, not touches on, but highlights can highlight a cultural difference here, where somebody who is staunchly pro-choice and believes that the fetus doesn't have a right and isn't a person until, let's say, the third trimester, right? Like that's fair. If they do this abortion early and then the fetus is born and it's a child now and it's been delivered, now there's like strictly this continuous story from fetus to child, and it demonstrates the potential, and now there could be a retroactive regret towards it, or it could be the staunch line of, well, it wasn't a person, I don't have guilt about it as a result, right? There are people who have been brought up to recognize that, you know, the fetus isn't a child, and that until then it is completely the other thing. They're being given these ideas. A lot of, like, when you're very young, right? You don't reason all the way through this. You don't reason, oh, life has an intrinsic value, but you grow up with some of the morals and teachings of your society and your parents. And if your parents
No,
tell
it's
you that
exactly. It has to do with
it's fine,
culture as well. Yeah.
parents can tell you, like, oh, abortion is perfectly fine, X, like, whenever you decide to have it for whatever reason, and you can come away with that assumption
And you could never break
and
out of that
never have to
assumption.
challenge it, right?
Of course.
And
And
that
the thing is,
person,
you're getting that information from your parents, which are, let's say, trusted sources of information when you're a young child, because they birthed you and they're raising you
they're
and they
your
seem to
parents,
know what they're
yeah.
doing, right? And so that might not be challenged until you get out of, let's say, your safe space or your bubble, and you go out into the real world where you interact with people who have all sorts of different perspectives, right? And come from all sorts of different cultures. Because, really random, but in Japan, you go into these baths, the ofuro, and you wash each other's backs. Like, these are grown ass males washing another grown ass male's back naked. Everybody's naked in the bath, right? And here in the U.S., like, people would be like, "What the fuck? Are they gay? Like, what's wrong with them?" Like, there's all this kind of weird culture about it, right? But that's just how it is culturally. To them, it's normal, right? There's an island full of cannibals. They eat people, and to them, it's normal and acceptable and okay, right? So it all depends on your culture and how you were taught or raised, right? And when it comes to the abortion principle, if you are under the assumption and under the belief that a fetus is not a human life and that a fetus is just a clump of cells, let's say, right? Then of course, aborting makes sense, right? You would
Yeah,
100% be of the pro-choice stance, because it's like, it'd be like me deciding
there's no,
between
yeah,
your life and, like, a basketball that's
and ice
gonna
cream,
deflate or
like,
something or whatever, right?
yeah,
Like, it
yeah.
makes no
If
sense.
it doesn't have the potential to be a person at all, then it's like, whatever, it doesn't matter.
Correct, but what sparks the debate is that a fetus will develop into a baby, which will then develop into a human and his life. So that's why it's more of a complicated decision.
Yeah. So yeah, both sides err towards their respective decision and view the other as, you know, not good.
Correct.
uh, here's one. A pregnant woman smokes and does illicit drugs, but intends to seek an abortion anyways.
That's a hard one.
Is her Are her actions morally permissible?
I mean, I guess, because if she's gonna abort it anyway, then her smoking and drinking is not actually going to affect the life of the child, right?
Yeah.
Because it's not
Let's
even going
say
to it's not even gonna
during
be
the first
given
trimester.
the chance to become a child. You feel me?
Right. Let's say she does this during the first trimester. Right.
Yeah, then it'd be fine, let's say, because she's intending to have an
Okay.
abortion. But here's the problem
Yeah.
again. I was born premature, so what if she does it during the second trimester, and then it's a
Okay.
premature
What if
baby,
she does
and
it during
then
the
she
second
breaks
trimester?
water, right? Well, then it might be a problem, because what if by the end of the second trimester she breaks water and then has to birth the baby, right?
Let's say her water doesn't break though, because
Okay,
you can induce the water to break and have an abortion during the second trimester. That is a legal abortion procedure.
okay, so I would still say it's questionable now. In the second trimester, it's questionable. Even if she's intending to get the abortion, I think it's questionable for her to
Hmm.
be smoking and drinking, because I feel like, okay, let's say you're 8 months into your pregnancy,
and you're planning on aborting
third
it, and you
trimester.
just haven't waited, right? You just haven't waited.
Yep.
You haven't done it yet.
And
You're
you've
like,
been
no, I'll
doing-
go.
you've been
You've been
doing
kind of putting it off. You're
heavy
fucking
drinks.
procrastinating it, right? You've been procrastinating this, and then all of a sudden your water breaks and you're being rushed to the hospital to deliver the baby. It's like, can you just reroute to a different room and have an abortion instead? Like, how does that work?
Yes, you can.
You can.
Okay, you were able to. As to the current status, I'm not 100% sure. During the third trimester, or past the point of viability, due to Roe or Planned Parenthood versus Casey, restrictions on abortions are a lot easier to pass. They have to go by the undue burden standard, but the government says past the point of viability and continuing onward from that point, the government has an interest in the right of the human life and the right to the potential of that human life. So if it's able to survive outside of it, the government may be able to interfere. I would have to look into current law to tell you whether or not they could. I know that.
Oh, so if they're about to be born, if the baby's going to be born and
the
it
government
can survive on its own, the government could
mandate
step
to say,
in. And,
I am interested in the life of the child.
Okay.
Yeah.
But then, does the government take care of the child? Like, how does that work?
Oh, not that outside the conversation right now, I think, because this is just the act of doing it, not the consequence.
Okay,
I would rather do that before I get into consequential arguments.
No, of course. Interesting.
So,
so I can kind of see how that goes. If it can survive on its own,
what if she
then
believes she's pregnant.
Okay, she believes she's pregnant,
She's not sure,
but she's not sure.
and she doesn't know whether she'd aborted or not.
I don't know. I don't know what to say about that situation.
That one's iffy. So I think in the case where it shows a lack of respect again towards a potential human life, where you're damaging it with like you're potentially. I think in my head how I frame that is causing undue harm to a potential life, which shows a lack of respect for it. There was a server at a restaurant who overheard a woman say that she was pregnant. And the pregnant woman asked for some drinks containing alcohol. She didn't appear pregnant, but the woman was saying amongst her friends that she's X weeks along. The server denies her alcohol and refuses to bring it to her, instead bringing her a glass of water. Is the server in the right? Can a pregnant woman drink alcohol? Should they be allowed to? Should it be legal, I suppose?
Probably not, honestly.
It is legal, by the way.
I know it is, but it probably shouldn't be based on the damage that does to the kid.
Fetal alcohol syndrome is well known and well documented, right?
Precisely, right? Like, if it wasn't, right? Like, let's say like someone's smoking a Juul while they're pregnant, and there's no documented case of anything that it does. That's a different story. That's just uncharted territory, right? Just whatever. There's got to be some casualties before they figure out,
Yeah, but now again, I think you get to the point like, do you err on the respect for human life and the potential, or do you err on the woman's right to do what they want?
Yeah, and I think that's what it boils down to. And then, in every instance of any case of this pro-choice versus pro-life, is you have to err on one side or the other. There's no good way to have a common bound unless we do. Oh, I've got it. Okay, a solution to this problem would be if we developed artificial wombs, where you could take the inseminated fetus and pull it out of the woman and put it into an artificial womb. Now the woman can do whatever she wants, right? And then at any point in time, she can decide to abort the baby, let's say, right? But let's say that once the artificial wombs are there, that decision is no longer there. You take the fetus out of the woman and put it into this artificial womb, and then at that point, the woman can do whatever the fuck she wants, right?
Mm-hmm.
And we can still have the respect for the potential human life of the baby by letting it develop into a baby. And now the consequential part of that, we could figure it out later, like if the government takes care of it or whatever, right?
In that scenario, is the mother still allowed to abort the child once it's in the artificial womb?
Let's say no. Because then we have respect for both sides. No.
Okay, so now is the government does the government have a job to do in finding embryos and putting in artificial wombs? Who gets to make that decision? Because if so, we have a lot of pregnancies that need,
Attention, correct. Yes, correct. I think that no, I think it falls on the person's responsibility. What I mean is, if someone is pregnant and they don't move it to the artificial womb, it is now their problem and they have to carry out the pregnancy. You get me?
I see.
So they cannot abort it. Like if you come into
But
my clinic,
once it's in the artificial womb, they can't change their mind.
no,
What if it's where the spouse dies, just like before?
still no.
Still no.
Still no. Because now we have a way to not
They're
err on
always
either
viable.
side, right? Every instance is
Yeah,
now viable
it's
without erring
always
on either
viable.
side. Correct. Because for example, the woman could just abandon the child in the artificial womb. Let's say it's in a hospital or whatever, and then the hospital has a mandate. Like for example, the reason that dumpster babies are so stupid is because if you leave a baby outside of a fire station or a hospital or a police station, I can't remember the exact locations, but there are certain locations where if you leave a baby, they're forced to take it in and take care of it, and then it goes through the foster
Right. So
program or whatever.
you want to separate the woman's right to life, liberty, pursuit of happiness from the fetal right.
The fetus is correct, because that's the only way I really see of it potentially
What if
coming
they
to a
cite
resolution.
what if they cite psychological damage due to the fact that they know that there's a child of theirs genetics out there that they're not supposed
I think the psychological damage in any instance is going to occur, because even if you have a woman who wants to get pregnant, who wants to have a kid, and then she has the kid, there's some psychological damage there. Maybe she doesn't like her kid. What if her kid is a total psychopath, right? Then she's going to have psychological damage from that. Or maybe she births the kid and she finds out, wait, I really didn't want to have a kid. I made a mistake. I want to pursue my career. I want to become a rock star or whatever. You're going to have some psychological damage.
We wouldn't kill the kid once it was born.
No, exactly. But that's what I'm saying is that there's going to be some psychological damage no matter what the instance is, dependent on the person and their mentalities.
So do you think that once a child is delivered, regardless of how early it is, if it is not guaranteed to die, like let's say missing limbs and bleeding out and not breathing, etc., like it has a good chance at life, that the moment it is delivered, like essentially outside
Yes,
of
it's over. It's over.
It's over. Okay,
It's over.
interesting. Because prior to the Partial Birth Ban Act, let's see what year that was. But prior to this, I believe it was the case such that you could terminate a delivered child outside of the womb based on if the mother wanted it or not. Let's see. In fact, so do you know the procedure where you kill a fetus? Let's call it a fetus. You kill a fetus before you have the abortion, like you inject it with something to still the heart, and then proceed to abort the child. Abort meaning remove it from the womb, right? There's a procedure in the second trimester where the fetus is enough points along in its development that it has a heartbeat and it has all these other things, and they say, okay, well, we are going to inject it with a chemical to stop its life, and then proceed to evacuate it from the womb, right? This procedure, according to what I've read, was done in response to the Partial Birth Ban Act enacted in America, where the Partial Birth Ban Act says you cannot, if any part of the fetus makes it past the vaginal canal or the crowning while it is alive, you have to treat it as though it will survive, right? And you cannot terminate life outside of the womb. And that procedure was done in response to that, so that second trimester abortions were still possible, right? If I can't bring the child out, I have to terminate the child before that, or terminate the fetus before it's delivered. It's actually more it's riskier to do the injection than it is for the mother in terms of complications than it is
Yes. Okay. Makes
to
sense.
deliver and terminate.
Makes sense.
So there's an article written by some guy who says, by some guy obviously, did I violate the Partial Birth Ban Act, where during the second trimester he uses forceps to terminate the life of the fetus inside the womb before evacuating it moments after. Yeah, none of them are pretty. Because he doesn't want to do an injection, which has a risk of much higher complication than simply using forceps to terminate the fetus life. And I'm using very careful language here because I can use what he wrote if you want to feel morally obligated to have a response. But what he wrote, and I'll say it, careful caution, what he wrote was I used the forceps to crush the head of the fetus and then evacuated the remains.
So he killed it inside the womb and then pulled it out. Yes.
This is something that somebody wrote. Did I violate that? I then inserted my forceps into the uterus and applied them to the head of the fetus, which was still alive, since fetal injection is not done at that stage of the pregnancy. Essentially, she was along her second trimester, but too early for it to be a procedure to use a fetal injection. I closed the forceps, crushing the skull of the fetus, and then withdrew the forceps. The fetus, now dead, slid out more or less intact. The patient, who was awake, hardly felt the operation. She was relieved, grateful, and safe. She wants to have children in the future. So we have this instinct where if it is delivered, you should not be able to terminate the life, right? But is that simply as semantics are to wordplay? Is it just what if it was terminated about 3 seconds before it came out of the womb, right?
Exactly. That's the whole barrier problem. It's the whole barrier problem.
Why is that barrier so important? What about, is it once the water breaks you can't terminate it? Because that would, I think, outright say you cannot induce water breaking in order to have an abortion, which it's one of the things you kind of have to do if you're going to abort something that's past the second trimester, because it's developed enough where you can't just fiddle with it and get it gone, right? The amniotic sac has developed along to the point where it's like, okay, water will break. You're going to induce this.
Yeah, you can't just abort it. There's a process before it.
I think it's, when you hear something like that, you think, okay, well, my instinct, my gut feeling is, well, maybe the pro-life have something here. Maybe it's not just this religious aspect, but they can't bring themselves to agree with something like that.
No, of course not, because it's difficult for anybody to agree with something like this, like specifically in this way, right?
I think even pro-choice have difficulties saying it because there's a gut instinct in a lot of people just to say that. But that doesn't mean that pro-choice is wrong. They still have all the other foundations of their arguments.
Correct, and this doesn't violate them.
Right. So yeah, that was the other one. And in the case where you believe that once delivered, or once any portion of the fetus is outside of the vaginal canal or outside of the womb, I had another thought experiment where the Partial Birth Ban Act is declared unlawful or unlegislated, such that partial birth abortions were available again as a procedure. Because what it is, and it's strange, because if you ban that type of procedure where the fetus comes out intact, meaning in one piece and alive, the other ways to do these second trimester abortions are to make sure it does not come out alive or intact, which is where you'll see a lot of pro-lifers say, look at what they're doing in abortion, where the forceps come in and tear the fetus apart limb from limb. Where, while true, the fetus is less structurally sound, very small in comparison to what they would have you believe in some cases, like early second trimester versus early third trimester abortions. And it's like scrambling eggs just using the forceps inside the uterus. Does that make it any less bad? Some people will say no, some people will say yes. So it's weird because if you repeal the act, then you don't have abortions where the fetus is quote unquote torn to pieces, right? To quote some pro-life choice words that they'll use. But then that means second trimester abortions, you could feasibly deliver the child and then abort it.
Yes. Well, okay. What about like a first trimester abortion, early first trimester abortion? How does that work?
Okay. I'm not 100% sure, so I'm going to open this up. Because there's a bunch of documents about the reality of late term abortion procedures, right? Let me see.
Because I understand like the late second trimester and the
so
third trimester abortions are kind of violently,
Yeah,
they're
they're
kind
a
of
lot
violent,
more
gruesome,
visceral, I
horrible,
guess.
whatever, right? Yes, like
Most
regardless
are,
of your stance.
you'll be happy to know. But depends on your stance, yes. But most are
Yeah,
done.
regardless of your stance, right?
Yeah.
Regardless of your stance, listening to that is not pleasant, and walking through the process of a second trimester, third trimester abortion, even in words, is kind of not nauseating and like just not. It's off-putting, even if you have the stance of pro-choice, and even if it doesn't change your stance of pro-choice, right?
Yeah.
But how are the first trimester abortions?
So first trimesters are very clinical, and it sounds like you would be happy to know that most abortions are done during the first trimester, during the first 12 to 13 weeks of pregnancy. And they use
Yes, that seems a lot less psychologically damaging.
Yeah, they have a procedure called vacuum aspiration or suction abortion, where the vagina will generally be opened with a speculum to keep it open, anesthetic to the cervix, and then insert more or less a vacuum, small tube to provide suction to clear out the contents of the uterus. So, vacuum all the walls, get everything out. And the fetus is not far enough in its development for this to be a problem, right? You could feasibly just and suck it all out.
Okay, that makes sense. So I think we've covered the main issue being that the pro-lifers err on the side of the woman's choice and the pro-choice people err on the viability, on the side of not caring as much. Like a pro-choice person isn't caring about the viability of the fetus
as much,
turning into a life as much.
Either not caring at all, like they are not a person until delivered, or
not as much.
The rights
right?
of the woman, supersede that of the fetus.
Correct. And then so we've boiled that down, and then now we've kind of covered the difference between first trimester abortions versus later abortions, and the kind of gruesomeness behind it. And that obviously this is kind of a very big issue, which also feeds into the whole problem that we don't have a third party.
We don't have a correct.
We don't have an authority. We don't have a correct answer. We don't have a third party authority that rules, what is and isn't allowed, right? And that's kind of the thing with the system we have in this world is like you can take someone who's morally corrupt and morally dangerous and does a lot of really immoral things, but as long as they have money, they'll survive. You know what I mean? They can build their own. They live in their own house. They're surrounded by whatever people they're surrounded by, and they can kind of survive because the system that we have isn't based on morals, right?
Not a true moral, not like a categorically true moral statement.
Correct. It's like we have laws, but laws aren't based on morality either, right?
You can try, but generally it's like, oh, well, people should be allowed to do what they want. Okay, let's make laws saying the government can't restrict those things. Okay, that's a good start.
Yes.
But not every law is moral. Just because it's legal doesn't make it right, and just because it's illegal doesn't make it wrong.
Doesn't make it wrong, correct. Like smoking weed is illegal. It might not, in a lot of places. It might not be immoral,
wrong, yeah.
right?
So with
All right.
oh God, what I found, and I think this is closest to what I actually do believe about this, is that regardless of whether it is morally right or unjust or wrong to seek an abortion or have an abortion, you can go about it in a very malicious manner. Exercising a moral right does not mean that you are a good person. You can do something that's morally correct in such a way, this is the intention argument, in such a way that it is vile to hear about. So let's say the 2 week to Paris thing. That's I cannot bring myself to agree with them. Even if I believe that it's their absolute right to seek an abortion, I would disagree with them that they they should do it in that manner, you know?
Correct. There's ways to do things where there's a moral way, there's an immoral way, and then you can still do a moral thing in a way that is questionable, and an immoral thing in a way that is less questionable, you know?
Yep.
Like, for example, stealing, you consider it immoral. But if you steal to provide for your family, like, your little kid is going to starve to death unless he eats that day. Like, it's been like 5 days, 6 days, he hasn't eaten any food, and you steal to feed your kid food, right? It's an immoral thing, but you're doing it in a less questionable way, right? Especially if you don't hurt anybody, right? But you could do a moral thing and have it be done in not an immoral way, but in a questionable way, right?
You could be,
and I think that's how it goes with abortion as well. Is that you could abort for good reasons, you can abort for bad reasons, and you can abort for everything in between, right? And the question is, should the government be involved, and should legality become a part of it? And that's more difficult, because the same way that we have the free speech amendment, we don't want the government like coming in and compelling us to say certain things or not say certain things. It's more difficult or iffy, questionable when the government gets involved in things like this, because a lot of people are doing things that they shouldn't do, or immoral things, and the government isn't stopping them. So why come in and make government legislation when it comes to abortion specifically, when you're going to let's say, negatively impact a lot of women who want to get an abortion or were raped or whatever, right? Like, if a woman gets raped and is pregnant, like, she should be allowed to have an abortion. That's my stance on it. And if you outlaw abortion, now you're going to have, because they might still get the abortion, right? They might still get the abortion, just illegally, and now it's not going to be sanitary, and they might die, and like, it's a whole fucking nightmare, right?
Abortion.
It's the same way. It's the same way that legalizing weed helps fight against the drug war.
It would make it better, right? That's the thing. Legal abortion it's kind of obvious when you think about it, but one of the safest medical procedures out there. Now, this is a frequent tagline, and I would say it's because it's a very controlled procedure. It is usually elective, meaning that there's nothing wrong with you, so that they're not trying to fix anything. They're just taking action, right? It's a very controlled environment for the most part. And if most are done in the first 13 weeks, there's very little risk of complication on top of that. So it's generally safe. It's generally safe. I would say that maybe framing it as the most safe medical procedure kind of pumps it up a little bit too much. Because most medical procedures are to save your life, right? It's not like...
Yes.
There's something wrong and you're trying to stop them from dying instead of something else. So in this case, it is medically safe, though. It is medically sound. And making it illegal actually causes
more harm. It causes more harm on the overall, because people who, they're just going to get illegal abortions, and that's going to be a whole nightmare in and of itself, right? That's why dealing with the legality, like outlawing abortion, isn't going to stop abortion. It's just going to make abortion more unsafe. The people who really want to get abortions are still going to get abortions. The same way that we were just saying about weed, right? You outlaw weed, same thing that happened with alcohol, with prohibition and shit like that. So I think that that's something important when it comes to abortion, is that the legality of it, I don't think we should fuck with it to make it illegal, because it's going to be more dangerous, right? I think you could argue the morality all day, but as far as the impact on the realistic like tangible impact it's going to have, I think that outlawing it is a bad idea.
Right. And I think that if you have a problem with the reasons that people are doing it, like you said, people can just get around that by saying other things. So you can't say like, oh, it's illegal if you have a bad reason. You could argue that because it's morally unjust, but or you can view it as morally reprehensible for somebody to pursue it for a bad reason. You could argue it.
Yeah.
But I could not. For instance, I don't know enough about the viewpoint, and I don't think I agree with it. I think I regretfully, in order to cause the least harm to people seeking abortions, would allow people to make abortions for bad reasons.
Yeah, because when you have a system like that, there's going to be some bad that slips through. I'll leave with one quote here. I can't remember it exactly, but it's a quote like, "I would rather let 100 guilty men walk than see one innocent man imprisoned," right? And it's talking about the justice system where it's, you know, the harm.
Actually opens.
It opens a huge, yeah, no, it opens a huge thing, but that kind of indicates that when you have a system like this, right, like the people who are getting abortions for bad reasons, even if you make it illegal, that's not necessarily going to stop them from making the abortions for bad reasons, right? Especially, and this is where you can consider this aspect. If you're a person who's going to get an abortion for a bad reason, right? Like literally, let's say your reason is fuck this baby, right? That's your reason. You're like fuck it, and you just abort it, right? You hate the baby, so you just abort it, right? Well, if it's illegal, you're still going to do it. You're still going to abort, right? The legality of it isn't going to stop you. But if you're a very respectable, straight-edged, right between the lines kind of person who never breaks the law, always drives the speed limit, is always within every single line and boundary as far as the law is concerned, and they outlaw abortion, even if you really want to get an abortion, you might not actually do it, right? And it might cause you undue harm or stress or problems or whatever, right?
Mm-hmm. So interestingly, I would say, well, sex-selective abortion is illegal. We view it as immoral too, but wouldn't people just seek illegal abortions for that too?
Correct, and they do.
Oh.
All right, I gotta peace out. So I don't know if you and Adam want to continue with your, like, just going back and forth while I pop out, or if you just want to wrap up here.
Okay, that's fine.
Okay, so this has been a fantastic, marvelous, wonderful episode with Daniel speaking on the topic of abortion and learning about pregnancy and all that. And yeah, I know. We had some great thought experiments, and I really wrapped my head around a lot of different things. And so with that, I'd like to conclude episode 1 of season 2 of the Booster Writing God King podcast. Thank you very much, Daniel, for your research and the time you put into this, and for your time today.
I will note that isn't even the whole of it. There's still a ton to talk about in terms of legality and jurisprudence and court cases, but that's a whole.
That's a whole nother episode.
and it is not complete in almost. I feel so insufficient because I know that I don't know a lot of things regarding this topic.
Trust me, you've done more than enough, Daniel. Thank you very much for your time and your effort and your patience. Fuck you, Craig.
See it. Wow, he's really gonna leave and not like dismiss Craig. Unbelievable. How do I do this?